Life is composed of light and shadows, and we would be untruthful, insincere, and saccharine if we tried to pretend there were no shadows. Walter Elias Disney. Let's talk about Mr. Disney's lights and shadows. Hello again, and welcome to the series. This is the first episode, The Covetousness of Walt, D.E.A.R. Snow White, 1937. D.E.A.R. around here stands for Documentary, Essay, and Review. And if you're into Disney animation at all, then you'll find at least one episode of this series interesting, as we'll be doing an episode individually on every single Disney Animation Studios film, also known as the Disney Animated Classics. I'm your host, and today we're looking at Snow White 1937, the one that started it all. This script was written by me, so thank you, me. If you're new here, and for this video, we all are, welcome for the first time of, I hope, many. And if you're returning, I thank you once again in the future for your continued retroactive patronage. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into this together. Walter Elias Disney was born on December 5th, 1901, in Chicago, Illinois, the son of Elias Disney and Flora Disney, formerly Call. He was their fourth son after Herbert, Raymond, and Roy, and their fifth and final child, Ruth Disney, was born in 1903. In 1906, the Disney family moved to Marceline, Missouri, where they lived until 1911. Then moving to Kansas City, also the Missouri side. It was here in Marceline that young Walter first became interested in art, often practicing drawing his own creations based on the cartoons he would see in his father's paper. Later on in Kansas City, an adolescent and then teenage Walter became interested in vaudeville, the theater, and motion pictures, his youth coinciding perfectly with the shift from vaudeville houses to movie theaters. He then started his first company in 1920 with a friend, which soon went under due to a lack of demand and funds. Disney then went to work for the Kansas City Film Ad Company, a company that produced commercials using an early form of cutout animation. Through this, Disney's passion for drawing and painting became a passion for the infant art of animation. He began experimenting as much as possible during his free time, and came to the conclusion that he preferred cell animation to the cutout method used by his employer. To briefly define cell animation, because I didn't actually know myself, so I googled it. A cell, short for celluloid. A cell, short for celluloid, is a transparent sheet on which objects are drawn and painted for traditional hand-drawn animation. Actual celluloid was used during the first half of the 20th century, but since it was flammable and dimensionally unstable, it was largely replaced by cellulose acetate. The more you know. In 1921, Disney began working on his first film, Alice's Wonderland, based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, née Charles Dodgson. This 12-minute live-action/animation film was completed too late to save the studio that produced it, and in 1923, Disney's Laugh-O-Gram studio went bankrupt. Walter then followed his brother Roy to California, where he was able to use the 12-minute Alice film as an example with which to make a deal to produce 6 more live-action/animation hybrid Alice shorts, to be distributed by Margaret J. Winkler, with an optional 12 more shorts if the initial 6 did well enough to warrant more. Walter and his brother Roy formed the Disney Brothers Studio, which later became the Walt Disney Company that we know and discuss today, to produce the films. In the years that followed, Walt and his friend, and eventual number 2 at Disney for a time, Hugh Iwerks, created Oswald the Lucky Rabbit as their next animated shorts star character. An ugly custody battle ensued over the rights to Oswald, sadly, which was not resolved until 2006, 40 years after Walt's death. After Oswald, then came a mouse named Mickey. Happily for them, and for all of us, a century later, Walt and Hugh's second try at a mascot for the company and the brand stuck. And to this day, Mickey Mouse serves as the ultimate ambassador, mascot, and icon for both the Walt Disney Company and Walt Disney Animation Studios. Iwerks did the bulk of the visual design on Mickey, while Walt provided Mickey with his original soul and waggish characterization, as well as his famous voice, until Walt eventually retired from this task in 1947. It was reportedly too rough on his, by that time, heavily smoke-damaged voice. Fast forward to 1934. Walt had grown restless with making endless shorts and wanted his animation team to fully show the world what they could do. He became determined to make a full-length, sound and color cell animated film, the first of its kind ever produced in the history of the world. For this first full-length film from Disney Animation, Walt considered a few different stories, including his old favorite Alice in Wonderland, as well as another classic, the J.M. Barrie play Peter Pan. However, in the end, Walt decided that a simple classic fairy tale was the best idea. Something with a princess, a prince, an evil witch, and, oh yes, a few funny little men. Walt Timothy. Okay. Walter had a passion, an artistic drive, a will to create something astonishing, something the world had never seen before. Whatever else may be true of the man himself, and there is plenty true about him that I will get into later, the artist and visionary that was Walter E. Disney did succeed, not only in creating works of art that are still being discussed, analyzed, and loved to this day, but also in creating an animation house that continues to be capable of delivering that level of masterpiece now into the 2020s, almost a century after they started, with this film that we do discuss now. As the man himself admitted in private, even Walt Disney was a character, a mask, a kindly old uncle of myth, a methodical creation that a skillful actor portrayed faithfully in the public eye for over 30 years of his life. Walter Elias Disney drank excessively, smoked constantly, even above the level we normally associate with mid-century America, was unabashedly anti-Semitic, openly racist, and an often moody, frequently terrible, miserly, union-bossing son of a bitch boss. But he was also capable of making stuff like this. Let's talk about both, then. The great art he left behind, and the flawed man behind it. This movie is 86. My grandfathers were both 9-year-old boys when this film hit theaters. In fact, my grandmother, who knitted this sweater in the 70s, was 15 when this came out. So that's pretty cool. She's no longer with us. Snow White is referred to as Little twice in the storybook prologue, our first hint as to the themes of this movie. The story of Snow White is a cautionary tale about the fear of aging and the destructive power that vanity and jealousy can hold, as well as a parable extolling the virtues of patience, humbleness, and ever-kind, gentle optimism. This tale can be seen as an allegory of the constant clash between generations, an older woman desperate to hold on to the beauty of her youth, and in the process, attempting to resist the march of time and corrupt the birth of new beauty and womanhood. Snow White is a character I love because she is at war with a formidable foe through simply being outwardly beautiful, something she didn't choose, and yet she never lets it get to her. Her inner beauty and strength comes out through her optimism, hard work, and kindness, and she would thrive in any environment. The Queen's persecution ultimately only serves to highlight Snow White's true beauty, that being her kind heart and accepting nature. Since the princess movies are the foundation upon which I am building my Disney princess-verse theory, I wanted to get to this movie early, as it is the foundation for the entire Disney animated catalog. The Princess Verse is my name for my personal theory, tying all or nearly all of the animated classics into one single coherent universe, with consistent rules for the magic and somewhat of a story or through line, similar to the now very famous Pixar theory, first come up with by John Negroni. A full video on my Disney Princess Verse theory will be out eventually, detailing all the connections, rules, and the overarching story as I personally see it. Now, back to Snow White. The three original princesses, Snow White, Cinderella, and Aurora /Briar Rose /Sleeping Beauty, are often decried... I like all her names. She's got a lot of names, that girl. Are often decried by younger and newer generations of Disney fans as inferior role models to their later counterparts, since they are largely more placid, laid back, and reactive, rather than proactive, as we now expect princesses to be. Modern Disney princesses tend to follow the Rapunzel model, that being much more energetic, giddy, outwardly motivated, clumsy, quirky, and are generally portrayed as adorkable but still tough. The original three, on the other hand, while they all do possess their own forms of agency, are more at the will of the whims of the plots and the schemes of other characters. Are more at the will of the whims of the plot. Are more at the will of the whims of the plot and the schemes of other characters. Snow White especially has very little desire for anything in particular, the only want on her mind being a wistful wish for her one true prince to someday sweep her off her feet and away from her dreary everyday existence. However, what I admire about Snow White is her resilience of spirit. Other than being scared in the magic forest scene, she never once lets anything get her down, and remains in a friendly, jovial, and helpful mood no matter the situation. This is a 14-year-old girl who is able to negotiate her way out of being murdered, run away from home, befriend 7 full-grown men. Why did I put this in here? Befriend 7 fully grown, bad choice of words. 7 adult men, get them to let her stay with them, and come to a mutually beneficial agreement about their living arrangement. Snow White is an undefeatable optimist, and her strength lies not in questing for adventure like Belle or Rapunzel, or protecting a loved one like Mulan or Anna, but instead her strength comes from not desiring anything out of life other than to be kind to others and receive their kindness in return. There is an important lesson in Snow White's youthful pureness of spirit and intent. She's not a flat, simple, perfect, boring character, but she is a deceptively complex one, and those sorts of characters are often seen as simple. I know I've gone on a bit of a rant here, but it really bothers me when people simply write off the original 3 princesses as boring and anti-feminist and lacking character. Lacking outward agency in the story and lacking character and desires are 2 very different things. Cinderella's wants and needs are perfectly laid out, as are Aurora's, simply because they don't go on a big epic adventure to fulfill those needs, instead being a smaller part of a larger story, doesn't mean that they have any less value or interest as dramatic characters. For my part, I always find Snow White to be a genuinely charming character. Sometimes it's a joy to just see somebody try to make the best of things, no matter the odds against them. Adriana Casalotti's vocal performance as Snow White is nothing short of a revelation. She possesses the sweetness and innocence of a girl just on the edge of adulthood, but there is a quiet maturity and grace in her voice that hints at a young person forced to grow up far too fast. Adriana herself did not live a charmed life, thanks in no small part to this film. Walt Disney. He was looking for a voice that sounded away from every day, as if from another world. Adriana, though an accomplished Adriana, though an accomplished opera singer and an adult woman when she landed and performed the part, was the daughter of a vocal coach, and thus she had the requisite skill to pull off the often childlike but ever mature tone of the 14-year-old princess. However, her performance was so specific and endearingly lovely that Walt Disney essentially did what he could to dissuade her from taking any further film roles, and went behind her back to personally ruin her chances of getting more work in the future. When asked by Jack Benny if Adriana could appear on his radio show, Walt told Jack, "I'm sorry, but that voice can't be used anywhere. I don't want to spoil the illusion of Snow White." Adriana, though she was just 21 years old when this movie hit theaters and became a mega hit, had only 2 more jobs in the film industry. An uncredited voice role during the Tin Man's song, "If I Only Had a Heart," in The Wizard of Oz 2 years later, and another uncredited role as the singer in Martini's Bar in Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, 1946. When I was doing the research for this, that blew my mind. Anyway, onward, ever onward. Much like the evil queen coveted Snow White's title as fairest of them all, Mr. Disney coveted Adriana's voice. It could be his and his alone, because, you see, that wasn't the voice of Adriana Casalotti anymore. That voice belonged to Snow White. Mirroring her stoic and steadfast screen counterpart, Adriana did not seem to resent that her dream role in an iconic masterpiece of cinema had essentially cost her any chance at an actual career following it, though she had unknowingly made a Faustian pact with the devil of Missouri, ensuring her immortality at the cost of her success. Adriana seemed to appreciate the love people had for the character and her performance, appearing in promotions for the movie in her later life, and re-recording I'm Wishing in 1992 at the age of 75. There's also a really, really cool video of her singing that with Julie Andrews on TV at some point in the 60s or something on Julie Andrews' show. Anyway, look it up, or the 70s maybe. It's pretty. It is obvious that a woman of Adriana's talent, drive, creativity, intelligence, stature, mental strength, and beauty could easily have become a massive movie star, or at the very least a successful recording artist. However, just like Snow White, Adriana was never bitter, instead simply choosing to play the hand that life had dealt her and live her best. Adriana, you were as enchanting a princess as there has ever been. And you were also a fucking smoke show! My lord, look at this woman. Good golly. Woo! Okay. I really love the ultra-realistic style that the Disney animators were able to achieve with the rotoscoping in these early movies, but especially this film, since it is a first attempt on this scale, is particularly impressive. The movement is at times jagged, but the outlines and body language are confident and have weight to them. This was a bold, virtuosic statement to audiences who had never seen animation or animated storytelling on this epic of a scale before. The animation of the smoke in the mirror in the opening scene is still impressive to watch. Some of the visuals pulled off in this movie are absolutely spectacular. I love the dove that Snow White sends down to the prince, blushing before it delivers its kiss to him. Snow White has one of the strongest connections to animals of any Disney princess, especially to birds. A connection to and ability to communicate with animals better than other people is a staple and signifier of Disney princesses since the very beginning, starting here with Snow White. One of the best things visually is the character designs. While Disney hadn't quite figured out how to get the realistic humans to move around perfectly smoothly yet, they all have strong and defined looks to them. Snow White is delicate and beautiful, her yellow and blue dress an instantly iconic design choice. The Queen, of course, is striking beyond all compare in her regular form, and wonderfully rounded and grotesque as her witch self. The dwarves as well, obviously, are all unique, distinct, and perfectly realized. Even minor characters like the prince and the huntsman look pretty good. Snow White's horrific journey through the spooky forest genuinely terrified me when I was a kid, and I think it hits that perfect children's movie balance of being scary and thrilling, without ever being quite too much. We know that she is mostly imagining the terrifying faces and dangers around her, but that doesn't make them any less real in her mind, and thus they're no less real in ours either. The animation of the forest creatures helping her along the way is adorable and impressively lifelike. The scenes between Snow White and the dwarves, including the dancing scene, are all well carried out. While they drag out the plot a little, the animation is still a joy to just bask in and of itself. The kiss is so delicately, quietly, and peacefully done that you are almost surprised when Snow White eventually does open her eyes. The prince's voice is so gentle and tender that you really fall in love with him right alongside the princess. I think his name was Harry Stockwell. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Harry Stockwell, I think, was the voice of the prince, and he did a good job. The final shot of the castle is absolutely gorgeous. I could go on and on about the scale, creativity, and sheer innovation of this film's animation and visuals, but honestly, just go watch it again yourself after listening to this review, because it is beautiful, it is enchanting, and still all these years later, it's pretty dang good looking by anyone's standards. Everything about this movie feels classic. That's the feeling it gives me. This feels like the perfect blueprint for everything that would come, especially story-wise. It's simple, but is it ever effective? So basically, as I'm sure most of you know, but I'll just recap very quickly, the film opens with Snow White in the courtyard. She meets the prince, she sings a song, she's wishing, she sends the dove down, the dove blushes, the dove kisses the prince. The queen is jealous. The queen talks to the mirror tells the queen that Snow White is now more beautiful. Snow White sends the huntsman. Yeah, random guy. Weird. I'm not leaving that in. I'm probably leaving it in. Okay. Alright, the queen sends the huntsman to kill Snow White. The huntsman can't do it. He lets Snow White go. Snow White goes, and there's some business in the forest, and she's very, very scared, and there's a lot of faces everywhere. It feels a lot like Wizard of Oz as well, actually. It feels a lot like some tree scenes in the Wizard of Oz. She finds the dwarf's cottage. She goes in. She thinks it's a house full of children. She goes to sleep on the bed, as you do. And the dwarves come home from the mine, they sing hi-ho, the lyrics are different than everybody thinks they are. They come home, their noses go over the bed. Snow White matches their names to their faces, and then there are several scenes in the middle that are very, very long, as I'd mentioned, and they're just there for the animation. Like, as many people point out in their reviews, as we'll see, there is a 7-minute scene of them washing their hands. Yes, okay, drags down the pace. But it's cool, though, and it's funny. It's very funny. The thing is, like, it's a series of shorts. It's almost like a series of shorts because, like, back then, they would do a 7-minute short just about washing your hands with characters, and it would be like Mickey, and you'd be washing his hands. Anyway, it's like, they would do it just to do it back then, and it was because the animation was just so fun to see. You know what I mean? Anyway, okay, so, this is such an Olaf recounts. Where was I? Oh, crap. Yeah, okay, let's stop in the middle. Yeah, they sing a bunch of songs. Like, they do a little dance. They make a little... they do a little dance. They make a little love. and they generally get down tonight in the middle of the film. They do a little dance, they wash a little dance, they wash a little hand, and they generally get down tonight. But then the queen discovers that Snow White is not in fact dead, and I don't think we ever get an answer on what she does or does not do to the huntsman. Anyway, the queen goes down and makes herself really ugly. So, because her goal is to be beautiful, so she makes herself really ugly to disguise herself, rather than just, anyway, disguising herself with makeup. So she does a spell. She does a spelly spell to make, rather than just slipping Snow White the ugly potion. Why didn't she Why didn't she slip Snow White the ugly potion? For goodness sake, if there is an ugly potion, if you know how to make an ugly potion, and you want to be the most beautiful person, and there's one person more beautiful than you, why don't you give them the ugly potion, rather than using the ugly potion on yourself, and then making them die? You're still ugly. How do you get more beautiful? And if you have a potion to make yourself more beautiful, then just take that when you're beautiful, and you'll be more beautiful. What? I don't understand the evil queen. It's bonkers, this plan. It is nonsense. I love it so much, though. It's so dumb. Why would you take the ugly potion? Blows my mind. Okay. Anyway, she takes the ugly potion, and she dips an apple in poison, and she goes to Snow White, and Snow White bites the apple. She has a raspy voice, too. So there was a whole thing with the voice actress where they thought she was too old, but she actually was perfect because she was able to do a sort of a younger, willowier voice for the queen, and then when she's the hag, she was able to really sort of like play into her older age. Have a drink, something like that, you know. So she takes the poison apple and she goes to Snow White, and the dwarves are out, and Snow White bites the apple and she falls down dead because it's stuck in her throat. That's the original. In this version, I don't know, she swallows it and she dies. The dwarves come back. They chase the queen. They kill the queen. Well, the queen, there's a lightning bolt and she falls, and then the vultures, and it's a whole thing. It's pretty badass, actually. I'll talk about it later. And then the dwarves go back. They put her in a glass coffin. Prince comes. He kisses a dead body, which is a little weird. But maybe he knows the rules of true love's kiss. Who knows? I don't know what people know in this universe. That's the thing, right? Like, if you think true love's kiss is a thing, then go for it, I guess. I'll talk about that later too, I'm sure. And then she wakes up and they go off to the castle and they're happily ever after. And I would assume that, the dwarves come and visit sometimes, because that sounds chill as hell. Everything about this movie feels classic. That's the feeling it gives me. This feels like the perfect blueprint for everything that would come, especially story-wise. It's simple, but boy is it ever effective. Similar to the original princesses, the old princes get slagged off quite a bit too, which is also very unfair, especially to Philip in Sleeping Beauty, as he is still a top-tier prince to this day. I'll get to that soon enough. The prince in Snow White, however, has his merits too. His name is Florian, officially, if you didn't know. It's never said or referred to in the movie. That's probably like a retroactive thing, I don't know. Originally, the prince in this movie was going to be imprisoned by the queen, as she was going to be jealous of his love for Snow White as well. But they scrapped that storyline, as not only was the movie getting too long, but they had a much harder time animating men than women. And so they decided to focus on Snow White, the queen, and the more cartoonish dwarves, and leave the prince to the beginning and end of the film. This plot beat was then used finally in Sleeping Beauty for the aforementioned Philip a full 22 years later. This prince is good too, though. For one thing, I really love his voice performance. His singing is gorgeous and soft, confident but gentle. Exactly the sort of gentlemanly voice that someone retiring and shy like Snow White would respond to. While their romance is very brief, it still feels like a genuine connection was made, and so I still care about them as a couple at the end. He's also literally the second character that shows up in the film, so that's notable, and their connection is the beginning. The love story is very important to it. I guess, I get that he disappears a lot, but I love the way Snow White interprets the dwarves' small, untidy home as belonging to 7 sort of dirty and messy children. She's so young and innocent, yet still gives off maternal and nurturing energy to all those around her. She also doesn't assume that she'll be allowed to stay at the dwarves' cottage. She decides to clean it and surprise them, hoping this will earn her keep. Although she is young and she is technically royalty, this Snow White understands that she must fight for and earn her place in the unforgiving world she lives in. The story of Snow White is one of perseverance in the face of all opposition. Snow White herself, a tiny, sweet, physically weak and fragile teenage girl, is forced to go up against an extremely powerful magic user and all the resources available to her. The fact that Snow White survives it all, let alone never letting it all break her down for a moment, always remaining the same charming, empathetic person she's always been, makes this a story with themes that I both admire very much and connect to very deeply. The point of this film, shown in the miraculous True Love's Kiss final scene that Disney made famous with their iconic closing here, is that goodness, kindness, and honesty can and will succeed in the end, even when it seems that all may be utterly lost. The point is not that Snow White couldn't save herself, it's that she was worth saving. And the Queen was not. This is pretty much a laid-back hangout movie for the middle half hour, and I really enjoy just simply hanging out with this movie, watching the pretty animation, the charming characters, and hearing the timeless music. It really is a movie that can actually just coast on pure charm for about a full 30 minutes in the middle, from when Snow White gets to the cottage until the Queen is reintroduced a little after 45 minutes in. This laid-back pace allows us to truly explore the characters of Snow White, the dwarves, and their unique dynamic. Oh, there's that fly. Don't be like the fly in the movie. Of course I would have an annoying fly during the Snow White deer. Okay. Oh my freaking god, that thing's gonna buzz all day. I hope you can't hear it. I hope you all can't hear it, but that is so annoying. Okay. Speaking of that timeless music, one song is utterly lovely and enchanting, yearning and sweet, simple and elegant lyrics left hanging in the air. Still one of Disney's best and prettiest songs. Although Snow White's singing voice does sound a little dated at some moments, as the singing style Adriana Casalotti employed for it is quite old-fashioned, and with an intentionally childlike tone that some animators feared might sound grating, I still think her voice works an absolute charm here. Especially when paired with Harry Stockwell's slightly more timeless sound singing the part of the prince opposite her. Whistle While You Work is once more so charming, with a bouncy rhythm and sweet, optimistic vocals by Casalotti. The actress was able to emulate classic popular voices of the time like Annette Hanshaw or Al Jolson, while marrying that style with an operatic skill and tone that was far beyond her years. Hi Ho is another all-time Disney classic, as is essentially every song in this soundtrack. Watching this again as an adult, I'm struck by how well the music still holds up. Up there still with almost any other music Disney has produced since. In this scene, the individual voices of the dwarves are introduced one by one and are each as distinct and fun as the last. This song is simple, fun, and memorable. Snow White also immediately offers to cook and clean for them if she is allowed to stay. This girl is far better in a situation with strangers than most princesses. With a Smile and a Song is another timelessly lovely tune, and Adriana's lilting voice lends it an extra dimension of melancholy and gentle sorrow. Both performances of Someday My Prince Will Come are beautifully accomplished. There is a wonderful through line of longing and yearning in both the music and lyrics of this film, and the prince's final rendition of one song brings this full circle as he approaches the comatose Snow White. She is now, as Juliet once was before her, continuing on in the borrowed likeness of shrunk death. Doc is still one of Disney's warmest and funniest supporting characters, and the first in their long tradition of kooky old men, and followed by many, including Maurice, the Sultan, and Jane's father in Tarzan. I love the way he misspeaks and stammers. Each of the dwarves has a distinct physicality to match their voice, and they work perfectly in concert to create charmingly zany physical comedy in every scene they're in together. Snow White's use of humor to diffuse the tension when she finally meets the dwarves is smart on her part and is a lovely scene. Dopey is freaking hilarious. The physical comedy is absolutely peak. Grumpy and the rest are all equally entertaining, unique, and fun. And the Three Stooges-esque gags that fly back and forth constantly between them are a treat to revisit on every rewatch. Grumpy has the most developed personality and has the only arc of any of the dwarves, going from being hostile and suspicious of Snow White to eventually loving and accepting her by the end. It's a great piece of character development in a film that is a bit light on that in general, and I appreciate that, giving us an emotional through line to follow for someone outside of the Queen and Snow White herself. Look at that. Grumpy, Disney's first character arc. Grumpy also not knowing what the wicked wiles in women that he warns against even are when questioned about why he is against females is a surprisingly cheeky and nuanced take on the idiocy of blind sexism, especially for 1937. So I completely forgot. I wrote this script months ago. I wrote this, and this was the 5th one I did, the first of the golden era. And some of this I've completely forgotten already. Some of the details to just go out of your head once you watch 60 movies. But that's hilarious, and I agree with myself. Sleepy was always a favorite of mine as a child, since I related so hard to him. And he continues to be a favorite. His struggle with the fly kills me, and oh god, fucking yeah, seriously, no, for real, Sleepy, I'm prophetic. I continue to identify with him, and then I talk about the fly. There's a fly in this room. Right, I see you. I'm having a character arc in this video. Jeez Louise. Alright. Golly. Okay. His struggle with the fly kills me, and again, I relate way too much. No, that's the line I wrote. I can't believe... I'm not... Quasimodo predicted this, I relate way too much to his struggle with the fly. Yes, I do, past me. You don't even know. Bashful, Sneezy, and Happy are all wonderfully charming, especially in their facial expressions, and how round and enormous Happy can be, how twisty and red Bashful gets, and how violent Sneezy's sneezes are. Every dwarf gets multiple moments where they are the comedic center of attention, and they all effortlessly shine. Also, all of the dwarves collectively say, "Jiminy Crickets," at one point, all but confirming my Princess Verse theory in the very first 2 films in the entire canon, Snow White and then Pinocchio. Yes, indeed. The voice of the mirror is perfect for the atmosphere of this film. There's such an edge to this movie, a gothic feeling that's quite unsettling at times. The Queen is ruthless and obsessed, a terribly beautiful woman who is never satisfied unless she is more beautiful than all others. The voice of Lucille Laverne was thought to be too old and aged sounding by some of the animators, but I think that it implies that the Queen is far older than she appears, and has retained much of her youth and beauty through witchcraft and black magic. I love the way she sounds, how desperate she becomes after starting the film out so reserved. The transformation scene is one of the most spellbinding in early Disney. The ugly potion's ingredients and their effects are outlined in such an eerie and disturbing way, and the transformation itself is more impressively animated than even the Beast's transformation back into Prince Adam would be around 54 years later. The scene where the Queen creates the Death Apple and plots Snow White's doom is grim and queer, with the cackling of Laverne being truly spine-chilling. The scene where Snow White is presented with and bites the apple is perfectly paced and timed with the dwarves' realization that Snow White is in danger. Their ride back to the cottage, as Snow White inches closer to her curse being fulfilled, is thrilling and breathless, as is their pursuit of the Witch Queen. The Evil Queen has to be up there with the Horned King, Maleficent, and Dr. Facilier in terms of their knowledge of dark magic, as Disney villains. Oh, and Jafar, too. Her death by lightning striking the crumbling ground under her is still one of my favorite Disney villain deaths. It's animated undeniably vividly, is actually quite gnarly, and it began a long tradition of Disney villains dying by way of falling off of stuff. I'm sure we'll do a montage of that at some point. Thank you, Jamie French, for that idea. The Evil Queen from Snow White remains to this day one of Disney's all-time great villains. She is powerful, intelligent, ruthless, and skilled, which makes her an incredibly dangerous foe. Her motivation, an obsession with and unquenchable desire for beauty at any cost, is relatable and tragically real. Her physicality, look, and especially voice are instantly recognizable and memorable. Despite lacking a villain song, as Disney would not consider that a staple of their formula for a few decades yet, Snow White's evil queen remains one of the most memorable, dynamic, and chilling villains of all time. She swoops around in her flowing purple cloak, much as Professor Snape eventually would, like a fabulous great bat. The evil queen's design after she takes the ugly potion also, and especially the face, remind me of Herbert the Pervert from... I had to put that in. Yeah, the face reminds me a lot of Herbert the Pervert from Family Guy. Yikes. And now, before my own final thoughts, let's hear from 27, I think today, yes, from 27 other creators from YouTube and online who have done their own rankings. Let's see where they ranked Snow White and a few brief words on their most common thoughts. So like basically at the end of there's a critics roundup. At the end of these, we're looking at people who've done full rankings of the 61, 58, 57, however many there were at the time that they ranked them, of all the animated classics, and seeing where they put them all in that, and then doing them an average rank at the end. I'll show you anyway. Okay, first the YouTube ones. Hi, it's a different day. My recording stopped working 62 minutes into my original Snow White shoot, and I didn't realize, so I am now re-recording the last few minutes. Sans a few things on my desk, because it's the next day. Thanks for not noticing. Okay, I believe that it cut out right as we were doing Critics Roundup, so I'm just going to start again from the beginning of the Critics Roundup and tell you all about what people thought. L.S. Mark has it 36th. Says it's boring and lags in the middle, too focused on the visuals, and says that the Queen is the best part. Shea Frillis Productions, 26th, calls it surprisingly good still, amazingly well animated, and he liked it more than he thought he would. He says the dwarves are the best part, calls Snow White a somewhat boring but still nice protagonist, criticizes the pacing, but calls it a must-watch. Sean Chandler, 19th, calls it still a classic, iconic, memorable, impressive for an over 80-year-old movie. Brian Hull, 7th, says it's still a classic and forgets how much he loves it, says it still holds up today, A tier. The Trove, 5th, says there's some nonsense, but that the animation is stunning, the music is great, and it's just a masterpiece. Dave Lee Down Under, 2nd, says it and the story of making it are timeless and important. Modern Mouse, 1st, calls it top tier as it's the first one. The 90s Kid, between 1st and 8th, says it's a beautiful movie. Justin Watches Movies, 7th, says it's a strong start to Disney, loves the dwarves, Snow White, and the relationship between them all. The Glad in Gladiator, 47th, says there isn't a huge focus on the story or characters, and that he prefers a focus like that over what Snow White offers. Chris Aitua, 12th, says it has the classic Disney charm, and animation is a little dated in the story and pace, but really admires it all. Maple Street Movies, 21st, and finally the Movie Geek, 22nd, says it's groundbreaking and a must-watch. I literally unintentionally recreated Uncle Walt's desk. And now I'm smoking at it. My quest to just become Walt Disney has commenced, apparently. But, what am I going to do? Okay. Life juice. Okay. And the online critics, Collider, put it 8th, criticizes Snow White herself and the pace, praises everything else. Unshaved Mouse, 27th, says it's incredible how timeless it still is and that kids of today can still enjoy it. BuzzFeed put it 28th, says it's a classic, but that they don't like Snow White as a princess. Cinema Blend, 6th, calls it the template, says the story is odd, but it's a masterpiece. Paste Magazine says it proved commercial animated films were viable. Slash Film, 12th, calls it powerful, creative, and fluid, but says the story could be improved. We Love Cinema, 26th, says it's iconic and worth revisiting. Hollywood.com, 26th, says the principal draw to Snow White is its historical significance, but that it's a pretty neat cartoon when you cut to it. Screen Rant, 30th, says it's a bit dated, but that the Queen is still chilling. My SF Reviews, 18th. The Playlist, 6th, says that it's easy to take Snow White for granted, but after nearly 80 years, this was written a few years ago, it remains a miracle. Darth Docking on Reddit, 23rd. Noah Fryman, 18th, says that this is one of those films that he will watch more for the art form than the actual movie. It is a movie he appreciates for what it did and what it led to. What Culture, 35th, love the animation, but they say that you can tell it's Disney's first movie and that the pacing sucks. That was Snow White's placement in 27 different rankings of all the Disney movies from YouTube and from the web. And it was top 10 in 10 of those 27 reviews. And it was an average placement of 9.96, or basically 10th out of 61. Now for my final thoughts and themes. Snow White is an almost indescribable masterpiece, a triumph of both visual and musical storytelling. It is also obviously the most important movie that Disney has ever produced, and indeed one of the most important films in animation or cinema history. For the company personally, it set the tone for everything going forward. A deceptively simple fairy tale at face value, and a sweet, charming, and beautiful meditation on the natures of youth, innocence, jealousy, and obsession. This was the first of their films to use the spiteful older woman opposing an innocent younger woman trope, something that Disney continues to use to this day in various shapes and forms, even as recently as Encanto. I have to say, as a random last note, that the Foley artists went hard in this movie. I adore so much about Snow White. From the great pace, the well-drawn characters in every sense, the spectacular music, the clever humor, the insanely influential and skillful animation, and every other element you could name. However, what I truly noticed most of all in this watch-through was that voice. Adriana Casalotti was a phenomenal talent, a beautiful and warm-hearted woman who succeeded in life both personally and professionally in a profoundly impactful way. Literally billions of people have heard her voice at this point and will continue to into the future, generation upon generation of children growing up with Adriana as their princess. Walt Disney may have personally seen to it that her voice remained permanently and inextricably tied to the character. But his real-life imitation of Ursula the Sea Witch cannot take away from the phenomenal and incomparable legacy that Adriana Casalotti earned through a single, solitary voice performance she gave when she was barely 19 years old. As for the film, it's a 9.5 out of 10. While it has some small issues and some obvious dating at this point, it's Disney's first masterpiece. Their first of many, as we will see in the coming weeks to follow. And that's it. Next week we'll be back and looking at Pinocchio 1940, so please do join me for that as well. Thank you for watching, and if you're still here, good night, good luck, and enjoy the afterword.
I can imagine a girl. I can imagine a girl. She is waiting by the water wishing for the day she'll run away. She is lonely, the only daughter of a woman and a man who've gone astray. She speaks softly and never oftly of the dreams she harbors deep within her soul. She's like her mother, yet like no other, as the years of silence start to take their toll. I can imagine a girl.
I can imagine a girl. There are moments that she suffers. There are times her broken sorrow fills the night. I am watching this great pain of hers, feeling closer than I ever thought I might. We are bonded by a heartbreak. We have each wept more than we would care to say. I must tell her, for her own sake, of the chamber in my heart where she has stayed.
I am waiting.
She is waiting
By the water.
a dream creating.
I am wishing for the day I'll run away.
Her soul at play.
There is fire
In a fire,
in this daughter,
a great desire.
to be eaten and devoured by the rain.
She'll find a way. I can imagine a girl.
I can imagine a girl. She is growing, never slowing. Of my heart she is unknowing. From the first she was a thorn deep in my side. His affection ever waning, for his love she is campaigning, and the distance between us grows ever wide. Now I wander, torn asunder, I regret my greatest blunder, ever coming to this God-forsaken land. Was the king of this foul nation my demise and her salvation? Is one daughter leaving me with empty hands? I can imagine a girl.
That's all.